how, when one specifies the mass of an object, one only specifies the quantity of mass, say 1 kilogram, whereas when one specifies the velocity of an object, one must provide both the speed, the quantity of velocity, and the direction, which requires 3 variables to do, or 3 numbers to do. In the language of physics, the former is a scalar quantity, and the latter is a vector quantity. Further, the electric and magnetic fields underdetermine the electric and magnetic potentials. A single pair of electric and magnetic field values is compatible with an infinite number of electric and magnetic potentials values, whereas a single pair of values for the electric and magnetic potentials entail a single pair of electric and magnetic field values. The potentials have what physicists call a gauge freedom that the standard field variables lack. This gauge freedom constitutes an additional variable that has no observable consequences in terms of measurable electrical fields, at least if we restrict ourselves to classical electromagnetism. Now, consider a classical universe in which electromagnetic radiation is the only material substance. In such a universe, the formulation of Maxwell's equation using potentials would lead to the same space-time distribution of the electric and magnetic field values as using Maxwell's field variables, the standard ones that Maxwell used. So, under the above account of causation, one could offer 2 different complete causal explanations of the current configuration of electric and magnetic fields. One by appealing to a prior configuration of electric and magnetic fields, and one by appealing to a prior configuration of electric and magnetic potentials. Finally, it should be noted that although one might be tempted to claim that either the potentials are real or the fields are real, but not both, one need not make this claim. One could consistently assert that both are real. To see how the above applies to Kim-style objections in the case of the mental and the physical, suppose that as a matter of linguistic convention, one considered the electric and magnetic potentials, along with the additional variable designating their gauge, freedom, mental variables, and the electric and magnetic fields, physical variables. Accordingly, given the above account of causation, the values of the mental variables at time t naught, the initial time, would completely causally determine the physical variables at some later time, t, while at the same time the values of the physical variables at t naught, the initial time, also would completely determine the physical states at, that should be a later time, at t. In that case, the above account of causation would imply that there was both a complete mental and a complete physical explanation of all phenomena in the universe under consideration. So far, the above argument at most shows that considering causation to be a real relation is not a sufficient condition for the success of a Kim-style objection. The argument can be extended, however, to show that even the 3 claims that Peter denies, that the mental and physical states have no causal powers, that there are no events, there is no such relation as causation, will not provide sufficient conditions for the success of a Kim-style objection. Specifically, one can give a nomenological subsumption account of causal powers in the same way as for the causal relation. Further, nothing in the above counterexample presupposed the existence of events. What the above counterexample shows, therefore, is that in order for Kim-style arguments to work, one must assume something about causation over and above the 3 claims Peter denies. Without knowing what this assumption is, it is impossible to tell whether these 3 claims are necessary conditions for a Kim-style objection, and hence whether Peter's denial of these claims offers an answer to such an objection. Finally, I offer a few comments on an earlier part of Peter's paper. In responding to Chalmers' definition of a non-physical property as a property that does not supervene on the totality of the distribution of matter and radiation in space-time, Peter says that, quote, "I simply think it is false. It seems quite evident to me that if I am, as I suppose myself to be, composed entirely of quarks and electrons, then my intrinsic properties supervene on the distribution of matter and radiation in space-time, and necessarily so. Neither Chalmers' definition of a non-physical property nor Peter's reasons for rejecting this definition fit well with modern physics, particularly quantum theory. To see why, first note that when two quantum systems become entangled, the state of the whole cannot be represented as being determined by the states of its parts and their spatial and causal interrelationships. This is the sort of quantum holism that leads to the famous Bell-type correlations between distant particles. As Timothy Maudlin notes, quote, the physical state of a complex whole cannot always be reduced to those of its parts or to those of its parts together with their spatial temporal relations, even when the parts inhabit distinct regions of space. Modern science, and modern physics in particular, can hardly be accused of holding reductionism as a central premise, given that the result of the most intensive scientific investigations in its history is a theory that contains an ineliminable holism. Thus, the state of the whole, which is certainly a physical property, does not supervene on the state of the parts for these systems. For example, in a universe consisting only of an uncollapsed pair of photons and electrons all entangled with each other, the state of the whole would not supervene on the distribution of matter and radiation, assuming such a distribution could even be defined. Yet Chalmers' definition entails that the state of the whole is a non-physical property. And given that the whole is an intrinsic property, it follows that contrary to what Peter says, it is false that a physical system's intrinsic properties supervene on the distribution of matter and radiation in space-time. In response, Chalmers and Peter could revise their respective statements to read something like, supervene on the quantum state of the whole. The problem with such revised statements of superinvenience is that we have no clear idea of what a quantum state is. Both Chalmers and Peters appear to be assuming we do have a grip of what matter and radiation are supposed to be, as a parenthetical remark here. Otherwise, their respective statements would be vacuous, but that is another matter. Suppose, for instance, along these lines of using this, revised statement, suppose, for instance, we expand our definition of quantum states to include various mental states, for instance, Michael Lockwood and Quentin Smith have suggested. In this case, under the revised version of Chalmers' definitions, mental states would be physical states by definition. And under Peter's claim about supervenience, the supervenience of the mental on the physical would be true by definition, even if the mental aspects of the quantum state cannot be determined by what we normally consider the physical aspects of the organism. At the very least, such a result would be contrary to our normal intuitions regarding what distinguishes the physical and the mental.
Peter will reply.
So I want to say, I guess the best reply would be just to say a little more about what Kim's view is. So he doesn't deny that a person's being in a certain mental state at a time may be connected in a law-like way with other events or states of affairs. It may be a law that having a visual experience of the sort we normally that normally comes about when one is about to receive a blow to the face, if in a physiologically and anatomically normal person, causes that person to blink, or rather that is followed by a blink. Let's say that's a law. Could be, I guess. Kim doesn't deny that possibility. He just says that that wouldn't be a true case of mental causation. Let me try to make the idea clearer. Suppose, to simplify matters, that there was a particular neural event that caused the blink of my eye, and let's suppose even that neural event was identical with an experience of that kind that we have when we are about to be hit in the face with a heavy object. Kim says, yeah, the neural event was also a mental event. It did cause the blink, and so a mental event caused the blink, but not quite a mental event. That is, one of the properties of the event, being that experience, was not actually causally relevant. It wasn't a causal power of that event. Only the features of the event contained in the purely neural description of the event are causal